everybody. It's fantastic to be here on a morning such as today, remembering those who have lost their lives, given their lives for us. And like we said, we come to remember Jesus. And what verse could I have thought of when I was planning my sermon? And I don't know about you, but my memory of Bible is verses is not that great. In fact, recently someone asked me what was my favourite Bible verse, and my mind just froze. And I thought, you know what, there's so many different ones, I don't know. But there's one thing that really stood out to me when I was trying to think of this sermon today, and we've just been singing about it. There's no greater love than that was giving up your life for those of your friends. And I feel that's, as a husband, as a father, thinking about why I would give up my life for my family. As I remember talking to my granddad, he was a reconnaissance officer in the Second World War. He'd tell me stories about the war and all different things up until I was 10 years old. He passed away. And it's always had a real stirring in my heart. I know what it is to give up your life for somebody. And I thought, I'm going to preach from this. So I looked it up, and it's in the 15th chapter of John, and that's where we're studying from today. And we're actually almost, which is really great, we're kind of like going through what we just sung about, which is fantastic, and also kind of what Graham just brought earlier with the prayers earlier. So everything sort of intertwines really well today. But I don't want to dwell on it and go on and on. There's so much we could pull out from these verses, but I just want to focus on a few things that are really rich this morning. And there's three extremes of the gospel we're going to be looking at today. It's extreme love, extreme friendship, and extreme calling. These are the things that I want to be sort of focusing briefly on this morning. So I want to set the scene. In John chapter 15, in fact, John chapter 13 to 17, we have Jesus, and he is in the upper room. It's the Last Supper. And towards the end of chapter 14, when he's spoken about all the things that he wants to do and all that he is going to say the last words to his disciples, all the things that is on his mind, he says, right, we're going to go now and walk. And then people believe now that as we get to chapter 15, it's beginning to have a conversation as Jesus' disciples will walk into the Garden of Gethsemane. And this whole thing that we're looking at now is all centered around the idea of love. Fierce, undeserved, unconditional love from God. And you can imagine what Jesus was thinking. I often used to think, picture myself what it must be like in Jesus' words when he says these things, when he speaks these words. It says in later on when he gets to the Garden of Gethsemane that he was so full of anguish that he was sweating blood. And I can't imagine what that must be like as he's trembling maybe in saying these words, knowing that he was about to offer up his life. This is the Thursday night. As you go into Friday, it would have been Good Friday when he was about to be crucified. And yet he said, this is what my love is. Before I go, you must know that it's everything that accumulates around our belief and everything that centers upon what I believe and what it means to be a Christian is all surrounded and encompassed by love. And we see that as we see these few verses from the chapters, John 13:34. A new command I give to you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. For chapter 14:21, whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them. Chapter 15, verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. Love is at the center of all the promises. It's at the center of all the warnings, and it's at the center of all the commands of Jesus. And sometimes when I think about love, we can kind of think of this mamby-pamby thing that it's Hollywood. And we don't really get the richness of what God is saying at this point, or what love really means. It's a fierce love. It's like I read somewhere in the Bible it refers to when there's a reference to the lioness and her cubs, and no one wants to come between a lioness and her cubs, just like no one wants to come between a mother and her children. I can vouch for that, having my wife here. You don't want to come between my wife and kids if you've got problems, in the nicest way. There is a fierce love that God has for us. Not this wish-washy stuff, but an absolute one that is overwhelmingly undeserved, uncompromising, unconditional. And it is the center of all that it goes forth in these verses. So let's just briefly start off in verse 12. It's extreme love. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. So in this verse we are told we are to love him just as he has loved his disciples. In other words, God sets the standard. Jesus sets the standard. He is the source and the measure of what their love should be for others. All the different commands that Jesus could give, and yet this is the one that he really centers upon. His 12 disciples have been with him and with each other for so long. Almost like you can imagine people within churches who are with each other for so long. And yet Jesus says to them, I want you to love each other as I have loved you. And I think, how much do I resemble that in my life, in my family, in my church? When it comes to loving each other, the sacrificial love, giving up everything for someone else in the church, putting somebody else before myself. And yet God calls us that to be the most center of importance. Sometimes I think we tend to think that we're given to this life to compete with each other. I don't know about you, but there's a TV show called, although it has been on this year, The Apprentice. And it's a bit of a love-hate relationship I have with it. But I don't know if anyone hasn't heard of it, but the gist of the program is this, that you have this big boss, Lord Sugar, and he sends out all these people and they do all these tasks and they come back and they all come across as great friends during these tasks. But as soon as they get back into the boardroom where it comes to actually what went wrong, then they all start backbiting and backstabbing each other, and all their true colours really sort of come to the forward. And, and there's that bit when you was like, I wonder what's going to happen. And sometimes I think we think life is one big competition. We must do better than somebody else. We must strive in school. We must strive in our workplace to do better, to overtake somebody else other than ourselves. But actually, if you think, you know what? We're not meant to be doing this. We're meant to be actually loving and putting other people before ourselves in our workplaces, in our families, in our churches. It's interesting, like I say, how Jesus says this just before he's about to be crucified the next day. And one thing also really drew out from this, that love is, like I always used to say when I was younger, it always drilled into my head that love is a verb. Love is a doing word. Love has to take on action, otherwise it's not really love, is it? If you say you love somebody but you don't show it in your actions, then you're not really showing love to somebody. But God knows at the same time as that we all fail and that we all do our different things and that we're not perfect. A good example is that I just said earlier that my anniversary was when was it? 31st of October. I didn't say that. I can't believe I said that. Anyway, distraction. Move on. Yeah. My anniversary morning. My kids came in in the morning and they wrote this card to me saying, and a lovely card. They love to write, like to draw. They create this card. Candice brings me this really lovely card. Oh, you're the best husbands, the sliced bread, blah, 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 blah. Not really. But anyway, she gives me this nice card. And what would have been a great end to the story was if I could say to you that I turned to my left and I pulled out my card and gave it to Candice. But me being me, not that I forgot about my anniversary, but I just didn't get a card. I don't know why, but it's just something I always just don't seem to do. So she went off to work. I tried to kind of backtrack. I was kind of like, you know what? You have to wait till you get back from work before you receive your card. But she saw right through me. And so I said to the kids, right, mate, we're on damage control, guys. When she comes back, we've got to make dinner, we've got to make a cake, we've got to do all sorts of things, we've got to buy cards, we've got to do all sorts of things. And yes, it was damage control, I say lightheartedly. But in another sense, it was more than that. I wanted to show her that I actually valued her, that I loved her, that I was concerned for her. And that's why I think, and we'll see this as we go on throughout for this short verse today, that love is a verb. It has to be in actions as well as with what we speak. And all too often, we're very good with our words, but not very good with our actions. All too often, we can speak of people in such lights, but when we come to actually reacting and being with them, we act completely differently. And what did we sing earlier? They will know we are Christians by our love. They will know you are Christians in your workplace, in your families, and where else we are, because they will see something different about us. It's about laying down your life for someone, as Jesus says. What greater love could it be than laying down your life for somebody? Many of us here probably won't get to that point where we will literally have to lay down our lives. But it has to be something that we have to value. The value of it has to take center stage in our minds. When I was about 18, I was with a mission organization, and we were in Poland. And as a day off, we went to explore Poland, and we went to Auschwitz. And we spent about 5 hours walking around Auschwitz. You can have your headphones, and you can have someone talking to you, and it'll take you hours, or you can just explore by yourself. So that's what we did. And we walked around there. We saw some horrific things. And there was a story that was told during an Alpha course that we're doing recently, and it really stood out to me. And it's about this man called Maximilian Kolbe. And the story goes like this. On the 31st of July, 1941, sirens ran out in Auschwitz as one of the prisoners had escaped. There was absolute bedlam within the place. As a consequence, the Gestapo got together 9 prisoners, selected them from randomly, and was going to put them into a starvation bunker until they died as a way to pay for the person that had escaped. And the last person that they choose is this guy called Francis. And Francis comes to them, and he comes in absolute tears. He's saying, I have a wife, and I have my children. What are they going to do without me? What are they going to do without me? And then as he was saying this Catholic priest, Maximilian Kolbe, comes up from the back, takes off his cap, and he says, I'm a Catholic priest. I don't have any family. I don't have anyone that will miss me. I will give my life for you. So they accept his offer, and Maximilian goes into the starvation bunker. And the story goes that it was the most amazing time, in a sense, in this bunker, that over the days that happened, all sorts of amazing things took place. They were singing hymns, and it was almost like a church service in the starvation bunker in Auschwitz. On the 14th of August 1941, they needed the bunkers. So the only way they could do that was to give them lethal injections. So they gave a lethal injection of carbolic acid, and they all died. He gave his life to save Francis. 41 years later, on the 10th of October 1982, the death of Maximilian Kolbe was put into proper perspective in St. Peter's Square in Rome, in a crowd of 26 cardinals, 300 bishops and archbishops. Francis and the Pope described the death of Maximilian on that occasion in these terms: it was a victory like that won by our Lord Jesus. Francis later died at the age of 93, but he spent his life touring them, going around the world, talking about what this person had done for him, what Maximilian had done for him. And that he had died and taken his place. And just in the same way, Jesus, in a greater way, Jesus died for every single one of us. I was talking to some friends, as I usually do, like I just would tell you before I do my sermons. And I said, Jack, how can it be that someone who died over 2,000 years ago, how can it be that their impact of that can influence me? How can it be, Jack, that Jesus who died 2,000 years ago, you'll describe him? How is it great that he died for his disciples, fair enough, but how does it impact me? Well, the very simple answer to that is I've given this sort of in my first sermon, actually, the first ever sermon I preached in the evening, a while back now. And the answer is this: that you cannot deny that a person called Jesus Christ existed and walked this earth. You cannot deny this. It's proven by people outside of Christian circles in a variety of different religions. So you cannot deny that this person, Jesus, lived, and you cannot deny that he died. There's 2 facts. Even atheists will not deny this if they know their research and their history. So the question comes down to, who do you believe Jesus is? If Jesus is just another man and just another crucifixion, then no, I know his influence would never have impacted me because it doesn't hold any value. Whereas if Jesus was the Son of God, was who he claimed to be within the pages of Scripture that we read this morning, who we come to worship, And who we read in Colossians, which said everything was created for him and by him and to him. And he holds everything together. If this is the person, then it means it means the world of difference to every single person. Because all of your sin and shame was put at the cross when Jesus was there. And as I said before, this is why we can say when Jesus says there's no greater love. And love tends to be this beautiful thing that we tend to hold and we think, oh, this is treasure, this is beautiful. And yet how can you look at the cross and say the cross is beautiful? When Jesus was there and he was crucified with blood, and he says he was more than crucified, he was stricken in all types of ways, to the point that he looked like an animal that had literally been stripped when he was there hanging on the cross. How can we as Christians look at the cross and say that's beautiful? Well, the answer is this. We can look at the cross and say it is beautiful because Jesus says this is the best display and the greatest display of love that could ever be shown. That your sin and your guilt and your shame was put on the cross when Jesus died. A paradox, I know, something hard to understand, hard to get our minds with, but yet so true. And yet we must not underestimate and forget, without the resurrection, the cross is just death. But Jesus, through the resurrection, we believe as Christians that he brought everything to us. So yes, I do believe, I said to this person, if you believe that it was another crucifixion, then no. But if you believe Jesus is the Son of God, if you believe that this is the greatest display of love that was shown at the cross, then it means everything to us. We come to the next bit, extreme friendship. It kind of tags on to the last bit. Greater love is no one to lay down his life for his friends. Greater friendship, extreme friendship. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants because the servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Now, it's quite an interesting way of putting it, isn't it? You are my friends if you do what I command. And there's two ways of looking at this. You can either look at it and say, well, I have to do Jesus' commands, then I'll be his friend, and then what he did on the cross is meant for me. So you're kind of reading backwards, if you've got the text. But that would totally do an injustice and a complete misreading of what Jesus is saying here. See, when Jesus says, if you obey what I mean, what he's really saying is obedience doesn't earn our friendship with him, but it proves it. It's an outward display of proving our faithfulness and our love to God. Just as love is a verb and deserves actions to show that we love somebody, our friendship with Jesus needs to have actions. And you know, there's another verse I haven't put on the screen, but it's Psalm 25:14. It says this: the friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him. Now, when I was younger, I went through life knowing that Jesus was having this kind of flippant idea that, yeah, Jesus is my mate, he's my pal. And there's two ways, I think, that Christians tend to fall into these areas. And these are the two. We can either think that Jesus is my mate, Jesus is my pal, and almost to the point where we actually totally put aside the majesty and the sovereignty and the huge greatness of who Jesus really is, the creator of the world. That we just reduce it to something so formal, so mediocre. Or we come to him in such fear and trembling that we don't actually go to God at all because we're like, you know, how can I come before a holy and righteous God such as Jesus? How can I do that? And as Christians, we're called to have these two difficulties, but bring them into balance. You see, Jesus is our friend. And what a great and awesome and amazing statement that could be. You know, no other religion or no other perspective or faith has this idea that their God is their friend. But yet Jesus calls us his friends. And yet when we come, maybe when you come to God, I like to give challenges when I preach, so take it as you will. But what is your position when you come before God? Do you come before him as a friend and it's just so easy, but you tend to forget the greatness and the majesty of who you're actually coming towards? Or are you the opposite? Do you tend to think, oh my goodness, I'm coming towards someone so amazing, I just can't really do it, and I actually even avoid it? Maybe there's something where in the middle that you need to say, you know what? I need to come before God as his friend, but I need to recognize the greatness and the majesty of who he is also. In the Bible, the only two people in the Old Testament that are referred to as God's friends is Abraham and Moses. And both of those two people, you can read it in about Abraham, whereas after his obedience, he was considered as a friend of God. But God never actually says to him, you're my friend. When you speak of Moses is talked about as a friend of God, but the context is this. It's saying when he spoke to him, it was as if you speak face to face with a friend. So God considered both these people his friend. But yet, one of the most amazing verses at the beginning of Joshua, when it says about the death of Moses, and God refers to Moses as his servant, not his friend. Now, why is that? Why would God do that? Well, the answer, I think, is this. That although we can kind of put friendship at a higher level than servanthood is the basis of our obedience and our friendship. Being servanthood-minded in the way we react, accomplishing all that he had done, Moses could say, I had run the race, I had done all that God, I was his servant, I did it all. And likewise, so can we. But at the same time, we can say we are his friends. Why are we his friends? Because we know what's on his mind. We read later on in Corinthians where it talks about who has the mind of God except us who have his spirit. One amazing and outstanding thing to think about, that we could be called friends of God and what is in place. Not only do we know we're not just going through life obeying a load of commands, but we have a personal relationship with Jesus. And that's one of the biggest things also. I used to go through, when I was in school, saying, you know what, you can have your view of religion whatever you want, but Christianity solely is about a relationship with Jesus. And the context of this is that just before Jesus talks about being in the vine, and that everything that comes forward from the vine, Jesus is the vine and we are the branches, everything that comes forward from that is meant to be an outpouring of what Jesus does in our lives. And how amazing is that we can look and we can think, you know what? In all that I do, in all that I am, I can give God my all. That God is my friend. That I know I'm not just a co-laborer, that I can actually get to have a personal relationship with him. The last one, extreme calling. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. I just briefly speak about this point. Pardon me. God chose his disciples. In the same way, God chose us. God chose you. If you're a believer in Jesus and you're here this morning, God's chosen you. If you're not a believer here this morning, then don't start getting confused thinking, oh no, God hasn't chosen me. That's not the way Scripture works. How do you know if you're chosen? The way we know if we're chosen, that the Spirit is at work in our lives and in our minds. It isn't us who chooses God. It is the Spirit who softens our hearts. And if the Spirit is softening your heart, then the Spirit is at work in your life. If the words I'm saying, if your knowledge and your thoughts about Jesus are centered on this idea that actually, how could this person die for me? But you know what? I get it. I understand it. I'm slowly beginning to see it. That Jesus could die for me. That is the work of the Holy Spirit upon your life. And as we as Christians here today, if you are Christians here at home, God has chosen you. Ephesians 2 says, For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Now, sometimes we can get the idea of foreknowledge mixed up with foresight. I could dwell on this for a long time, but so I don't want to it's a huge subject, so I don't want to go too far. But sometimes people think of Christianity like this. They say, oh, God looked through the corridor of time and saw those who would choose him, and he chose them. But in a sense, it's definitely not what the Bible says, because in a way that makes God passive. No, God says that he foreknew and he chose you before the creation of the world, that your name was written in the book of life. And it is not by any of our merits that God could call us sons and daughters or friends. It is purely by the amazing grace of God. The thoughts that God has chosen you should be one of the biggest amazing things that you could honestly ever think about. He chose you to demonstrate his character. He chose you that you may know him and love him, be gracious and merciful, and be part of his glorious plan. Why? Because as we see later on, it says in that verse that you would go on and do things and you would bear fruit. That you would go on as a vine and in the vineyard, as the story tells just beforehand, that everything that you go forward and everything that you give is just an explosion of grace and thanksgiving to God, and that people will see your good works and see Jesus through you. And we are all called to be doing these things and what God does in our lives. As I come to a close, I want to focus on a video that I'm about to show you. If someone could turn the lights down, that'd be amazing, if that's possible. I tried to keep this message pretty short and sweet. Sometimes I feel like I'm up here for 15 minutes and then I end up going back and my wife was like, you're up there for 45. Time just seems to fly by when you're up here. But the message is really pure and simple. There is no greater love than laying down your life. And as we remember those, yes, we've been saying, who gave their lives for us, for people that they knew, for people who left at D-Day and other days, never knowing whether they were going to come back, who gave their wives one last hug, never knowing if they would give them another hug again. In a greater way, Jesus on this Thursday knew that he was going to die and give his life for his disciples and for every single one of us and for every single one of you here today and at home. That you would know God, that you would come to see him for who Jesus really is. And sometimes we need reminding of the majestic and the majesty of who God is. And I just want to play you this short video. This is the God that we worship, the creator of this universe, who set the stars ablaze, who set the planets in motion, who knows every cell in your body, every hair on your head, who is there for every breath that you've breathed, who knows you inside out. This is the Jesus that we worship. This is the God that we give our praise and adoration. This is who we come to when we come on bended knee and we say, you are you and I am me, God. There's no greater love than Jesus doing this for us. And all he asks us in return is to give ourselves for him. I just invite you to close your eyes as I end in prayer. Jesus, we thank you that you are worthy. We thank you that you are holy, that you would consider us this tiny thing in the speck of a huge universe that you've created. But yet you sent your son. God, Lord, Father, you sent your son, Jesus. You have sent Jesus to us for our salvation, that we may know the creator of the heavens, of the planets, of all that is in this universe. And yet you know me. And not only do you know me, that you died for me. That this message is for me. If there is those, we're just going to say a quick prayer. Keep your eyes closed. Maybe this is a prayer that some of us need to pray again. Maybe this is a prayer that you might pray for the very first time. You don't have to say it aloud. You can say it in your mind, which either way. But Lord, I want to thank you, Jesus, that you died for me. I recognize that I am just a failure in so many ways, that I am sinful and my guilt has kept me from you. But I thank you, Jesus, that you died for me and that you rose again. I commit my life to you, asking you to come into my heart. Renew me, make me a new person, that I would know this great love that you're talking about, that I would set my feet upon the rock that is Jesus. And Lord, I know that life will have its troubles and life will be difficult, but I know that I have a companion with me at every step of the way. And I have a personal relationship with you. And I thank you for that. In Jesus' name.